We've talked about guitars, and now I'm going to talk about amps. Where do you begin with an amp? Well, I think you begin with the old argument of valves versus transistors. I always use valve amps, and most serious guitar players tend to stick to valves, mainly because at volume they do sound better in terms of it kind of becomes alive. With a transistor amp, it does get louder, but it stays the same at quiet volumes as well as loud volumes. With a valve amp, it kind of interacts with your guitar. You want your guitar and your amp kind of working in unison. You want them to be speaking to each other as kind of one unit. And it's harder to find with a tranny amp. It just kind of it's a harder thing to get. Also, the thing about valve amps is that they are louder than tranny amps. A small 30-watt valve amp will be twice as loud as a 100-watt tranny amp. I don't know why that is, and it just is. Valves are loud. Whether you use an amp head or a combo, it's up to you. It's up to your needs. But I tend to stick to amp heads and have different speaker enclosures. 2x12s, go upright, a lot slanted. I use 4x12s. But the main thing about your speaker enclosure is what speaker you've got in the actual cabinet. I stick to vintage Celestion vintage 30s. They sound great. They do everything. They're sweet sounding at volume. Other speakers are good, but I just stick to those, and I find a lot of the top players are using Celestion vintage 30s, which is what I've got in this speaker cab today. It's a Marshall 4x12 with Celestion vintage 30s in. I'm not sure if your standard 4x12 doesn't have Celestion vintage 30s in. I think you have to specify it. Vintage or new amps. Well, the thing about vintage amps is they're point-to-point wired. There's no circuit boards in the insides of the amp. If someone has taken this wire and soldered it to that point there, it's all usually the older amps are virtually handmade. It's called point-to-point wiring. They do tend to sound nicer. They're kind of more transparent, although modern amps like Mesa Boogies and PVs, they've got circuit boards in, and they sound fantastic too. You tend to find the high-end amps like Soldanos and the Fender custom shops, they're all point-to-point wired, which is why you pay a lot more money for them, because someone has actually had to hand wire those amps and put a lot of labour into them. They do sound good, but they cost a lot of money. Today, just for this initial period, I'm going to be using two 1970 Marshall amp heads. Not for volume, not for dirt, but to show you how to get a cool, clean sound using an amp head with a lot of power. Valves do sound different. You can get nice valves and not so good valves. A lot of the valves on the market nowadays are Chinese or Russian. They do the job, but they're not as good as the old days when, the old British Mullard valve or a Phillips valve. If you can find those, they do sound fantastic at volume. They just sing, and it's warm, and there's lots of extra harmonics in your guitar. So that's it about amps. I'm going to move on to getting the clean sound out of your amp, and I'm going to demonstrate some clean sounds for you.